This year is the 70th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education decision.
Brown versus Board of Education is about equity and access.
Brown versus Board of Education was about separate being unequal.
Brown v. Board of Education is about progress toward educational equality.
The Brown versus Board of Education decision is about legal segregation. The University of Maryland was chartered in 1856. It took over 100 years for us to graduate our first African-American student. Elaine Johnson Coates is our first graduate. I think people need to know or need to think about the fact that it wasn't that long ago that Black and brown students could not come to our campus.
The Brown versus Board of Education decision was an important milestone in helping us come together as a nation.
It was one of the first times that I think we could look to the Supreme Court and them say that education was so important, access to education was so important. We can't make decisions about where students go to school based on their racial identity. We can't deny Black and brown children access to this critical resource that's going to be linked to not only their individual success, but the success of our society.
The justices made it clear that legally, segregated schools were unconstitutional or not permissible under our Constitution.
Whether or not it succeeded, I have to start with the fact that I think the impact that it had is really sort of centrally the first part of a ripple effect of equality across the board.
In terms of the legacy, the positive legacy, Brown and the Brown decision was really a launching point in many ways for some of the most significant elements of what I still call the ongoing civil rights movement.
The legacy, I think, and the impact of it is that it has given us an opportunity in this nation to be in community with each other. And so we have generations of, like myself and others, who actually did go to school in diverse communities in ways that I think it has paid off in our ability to understand the richness of our society and to have a repertoire of skills of how to relate to a wide range of individuals.
If I think about my own personal life and the impact that Brown versus Board has had, I wouldn't have been able to be here as a master's student or a faculty member, and certainly not the dean, without this decision being made.
Whether Brown succeeded or failed in its implementation is a really complicated question.
I think hindsight being what it is, we can understand both the strengths of the decision and the limitations of the decision. Desegregation of schools was not something that was readily accepted across the country. It was not something that was greeted warmly. It was fought for.
There were school systems in school districts that literally shut down for years and years rather than have to implement Brown. What does that say about the choices that those government leaders were willing to make to educate no one rather than to put us together in schools?
Many districts closed schools that were formerly Black schools, which disrupted Black students, Black teachers, Black communities, and led to the firing of many Black teachers and administrators.
Teachers who valued us, who wanted to teach us, who cared about us. Many of those teachers didn't get jobs in the reconfiguration of school systems. So that's also part of Brown's legacy.
What came out of Brown, I think, is advocacy for school desegregation, which many have interpreted as diverse schools. What I think the activists and advocates who were behind Brown, pushing that case forward, bringing that case to bear, we're working towards is educational equality, which can be very different from desegregation, particularly given the inequitable implementation of desegregation policies for decades.
Intent behind the decision was that we want to make sure that all children have access to the resources they need to a high-quality education, despite their background, despite their racial identity. We know that the promise of Brown versus Board of Education has not been fulfilled.
Many scholars, including myself, study segregation and desegregation today because it still matters. It's still an incredibly important factor affecting educational equality, education quality.
There is de facto segregation that still takes place, and that is segregation not by law, but by the fact and the reality of where we are. There is still enormous segregation in our schools.
Black and brown students are more likely to be in schools where Black and brown students are predominantly in the population. And that on its face is not necessarily the problem. The problem is that those schools have fewer resources. They have lower per student expenditures. They have teachers that are less experienced or that have had less exposure to cutting edge curricula. They go to schools that are older, that have been less likely to be renovated. They just don't have access to the same support, to the same resources that we know that students need to be as successful as possible.
Because our public school system is funded in large part through our community taxes, and our neighborhoods and our communities are still largely segregated, there are still schools and school systems across our nation that are largely segregated by income. So the impact of Brown and its failings really points to where we need to be looking at some solutions looking forward. We need to not just be looking at whether the law says segregation is constitutional or permissional. We need to look at the facts and how we address the solutions that will help us be stronger as a nation. Brown versus Board of Education still matters. If you look at sort of the long arc of history, the progress of our nation to become excellent, to become educated, to become responsive, to become a caring communities, takes a long time. And so the decision in Brown is to be celebrated as part of a much longer continuum for advancing human and civil rights in our country. Rights for all of us.
We know it continues to have an impact. We know that people continue to look to this decision to decide what schools are going to look like into the next century, the next generations. So saying that we cannot segregate, that we cannot decide that students cannot go to a particular school based on their racial identity is not the same as intentionally integrating schools. It's not the same as guaranteeing educational equity and resources to all students.
When you look at Supreme Court decisions that are coming down the pipeline around how we need to think about admissions processes, how we need to think about schools that are changing their profiles in ways of who gets access based on the kind of opportunity structure they had prior to college, it's really a scarier time of who's going to get the kind of educational knowledge and opportunity structure that prepares them for the roles we need in a society.
We need everybody to be able to sit at the table, and that means everybody needs to have access to a high-quality education. We know that individuals who have access to education, that have access to equal learning environments, that they go on to do incredible things that not only serve themselves, but serve our society. They're able to be more engaged in our democracy. They're more able to be engaged civically. They show up as doctors and lawyers and engineers that are ultimately going to contribute to public goods, not just for themselves.
I'm an optimist, and I think I still want to hold on to what Brown promised. In Maryland, we're in a really exciting time with the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which is investing billions of dollars in education, including providing wraparound services to students, trying to improve the quality and diversity of the teaching workforce, expanding pre-K opportunities. All of those investments in education, I think, are really important and can help us fulfill the promise of Brown and work towards educational equality.
We need all sorts of folks who are a part of the solution of teaching our children, and not just African-American teachers teaching African-American students. We need white, brown, Latino, African Native students learning from teachers who are like them and from teachers who are not like them.
And we can't afford to lose ground on Brown. So there has to be a collective set of ways in which we understand that the equality movement for all of us, the rights we all are desiring to have access to resources and opportunity, whether it's in education and other fields, centers around this.
We need to think more critically about how we support every student, how we show up believing in their capacity and their potential to succeed, regardless of the learning environment that they're in. And that's the kind of work that's happening in the College of Education. That we continue to be committed to educational equity, educational justice. We understand the law. we understand its limitations. And we understand that we need to continue to intervene and think critically about how we support all students and engage in the transformational work that's necessary really to continue to support students in our society.